showed that the area of the brain associated with addictive behavior and illness like schizophrenia was enhanced in children who played computer games excessively. I feel like we're talking about, the last group was talking about moderation. Well, we can't monitor what they're doing at home with the iPad. Like, they're gonna be taking those iPads home, right? So how do we monitor, like, we're providing them with that addictive thing that they can go home with and they could be on it all night long. And maybe the parents aren't okay with that. Like, you know, parents need some control too, I think. So yeah, that's just kind of how I feel.
I know in the elementary level we have a 2-to-1 ratio. We have cubes in our classrooms. I think it's been extremely beneficial, at least in my classroom and for the teachers who work with me, just how we're able to use it and integrate other subjects. So I think all students should be able to use them, and I think maybe if the middle school and high school will go to that kind of 2-to-1 and just have a teacher keep the cube in their classroom. And I know in elementary it depends on your numbers of how many iPads you get. I had 13 because I had 25 kids, so if you give each middle school and or high school teacher like 15 iPads, because I don't know how many kids you have, but that way they're at the school, so you can have that moderation. But that way everyone's still able to use them, because it is such a beneficial piece of equipment, and you can take it to the extremes of, I have a kid who, I was kind of talked about that, who it's very hard for him to write. He's autistic, and that's something that the iPads where he was able to do voice recordings and type it out instead, because that was easier for him. That way every student is still able to use them, but you still get that moderation, and you don't have to worry about them taking it home.
You don't want to have too much, though, for maybe autistic kids. It also mentioned in one of the articles that it can cause those autistic kids to lose even practice for social skills. If you're sitting them on an iPad, they're never going to learn how to have those social skills that they might be struggling with in the first place. I think that in the future, iPads I think should be available, but not specifically geared toward just iPads, but also teaching them how to use books and other resources. So have that as a resource that they can choose to use if they would like to, but also teaching them how to use other resources as well. In the article, it popped out to me where it says, how do you know that a virtual friend is really a friend, or that life is not a game, but a series of actions with consequences? It's kind of scary to think about in the future. Possibly kids could come to the point where they don't really know what's reality and what's not. Just being in that technology could be a big consequence.
Along with that, I teach children with autism, so I use the iPad a lot as a reinforcer, especially. It's not necessarily giving them the iPad and saying, play with it and don't talk to your friends. I use it as a peer interaction system. So I take a peer who's 3 or 4 and I bring it with my child with autism, and they work together. They work on a game together and they interact and they figure it out. Or if it's a one-on-one setting and I'm trying to get some information from that kiddo, like I work with letter recognition, and then when he does 15 out of 15 or whatever, then he gets a little bit of iPad because that's his reinforcer that he's working for.
What I think is really impressive about that is that it's intentional, it's purposeful, and it's social.
Right.
And I think the answer to the question, what should Olathe do next with technology, is that. It should be intentional and it should be purposeful. And one thing, I was sort of eavesdropping on a conversation between Lauren and Tanya at the end, and Tanya was lamenting the fact that there didn't seem to be much research in support of iPad use here. And I just think what I hope for the district is that it makes its next step based on research and not social pressure that comes from being south of a district that just went one-to-one across the district. And I think my perception just as a teacher is that building and district level administrators sometimes think it's a quick way to get positive press to say all our kids have technology or access to technology in class. And that seems like a particularly crummy reason to spend millions of dollars putting devices in the hands of students.
I definitely agree with that.
No, go ahead.
We don't know. We have no idea what the benefits, what the actual consequences are. I mean, think back to when radiation, the bombs were being tested, and there's pictures of families having picnics in front of them because they didn't know. What if we're doing that and we have no idea? But who knows most is the creators, and they say don't do it under 12. So I think as an intelligent, district, don't do it under 12. And I teach babies, so I am biased. But the suggestions in the pro article were use the iPad in place with pen and paper, which makes me want to barf, and replacing textbooks with ebooks. How horrible for these kids who need to learn how to read and write to not get those skills. I mean, what are they going to do if they don't learn how to read a book? And we teach concepts of print. We teach this is a cover. You read left to right. Can you get that in an iPad? You cannot. It's not a replaceable.
But at the same
subject.
time, what if you have a kid that can't focus while you're reading a book with your facial expressions, with your gestures? But if you have the same exact story and they're flipping and following along through that iPad, is that a problem?
Well,
I-
it's not an issue, but I
Right.
think that you can't replace it. It's a life skill to know how to read. They're not gonna get out, have a job, and someone hands them a manual and they say, I'm sorry, I'm gonna need this on an iPad. You have to know how to read a text in a book. It's a skill that you have to possess.
I think
as an
that's,
adult.
we're talking about an example there that's the exception rather than the rule.
Modification.
And- Right, a
Right.
modification. And that was something that was very troubling to me about this study about the California districts, where it was only in Riverside where they saw these advances. And it seemed like very questionable step in logic or in research methodology to look at the outlier. And I mean, this publishing company obviously has a vested interest, but to look at the one thing that was different than all the others and be like, okay, how do we get all the ones that came back this way to be like that? You know, like, to take, you know, the modification that's appropriate for one child and say, okay, now we're gonna do it for everyone, that seems backwards.
And-
I was just gonna say, in the guinea pig generation, there is no perfect answer, and so just kind of like how